Hi again, I hope you've had a good week and welcome to week 3. This week we're looking at professional development and lifelong learning. So just to recap on last week, we looked at strategy and talked about it being more long-term, the big picture with practical shorter-term plans attached. So they can't both be in isolation, different levels have to work together. So there's an important alignment between mission and values of the organisation and HRD, as well as other HR functions. Hopefully there's ongoing reflection and communication and response to changes, feedback and opportunities to ensure that there remains alignment of mission and values and HRD, and that HRD is responsive in itself. We looked at the role of the HRD professional. So this week we are going to expand on this idea of the professional role, including ethical perspectives and the continuing development of our career and the careers of others. So I realise that you're doing this unit for not only yourself and your own development, but also in a HRD role, you're always interacting with others and concerned about their learning and development as well. So this week, week 3, we're looking at our own careers and the meaning of professional development, which we're calling here CPD, Continuing Professional Development and Lifelong Learning, LL. And assessing their importance and relevance for HR training and development, or HRD as we tend to call it now. And we want to also understand the key drivers of these concepts. So have a think about your own lifelong learning. You're all at different ages and stages, but I'd suggest that if you're doing an OUA postgraduate unit online, you would be very concerned about your own lifelong learning, and it's a value that many people hold. This particular YouTube clip actually focuses on mentoring, and that is one way of achieving lifelong learning, working alongside people who are more experienced in a certain area, for example. But there are many ways of thinking about lifelong learning. So it would be great if you could actually have a look at the Johari window, which is on the site in week 3, because it highlights the idea that we can always continue to learn more about ourselves, and that our learning needs will change over time. So you can see on that Johari window that there's an area of space that we don't actually know about ourselves. Of course, it's very hard to measure that, but the idea of ongoing learning is that you become more aware of those parts of yourself, more, I guess, capable of dealing with complex situations, and that's certainly something that lifelong learning can offer. Also, when you're working in HRD, the career management is actually central. So of course for yourself, but in the HR role, or as a manager, or even as a colleague, there's lots of opportunities you'll have to help others achieve their career goals, maybe change careers, get into an area that suits them better. So if you could have a look on the website for this week, looking at the self-assessment exercise on page 413 in the Noe and Winkler text, that's looking particularly at careers. And have a think of that, about the implications of where you sit in that self-assessment exercise. Does it offer you any insights at all? Okay, so HRD is very focused on CPD and LL for a whole range of reasons. One is, of course, that there's a big push now towards having learning organisations where mistakes aren't necessarily criticised, but they are taken, okay, this is an opportunity for learning, and so we need to be open about the areas of difficulty and become a learning organisation where we gather resources to help us as individuals, as groups, and as the whole organisation. But more than that, globalisation has had a big impact in that we are having to continually adjust pretty rapidly to the way the world around us is changing. And so we have to be lifelong learners, really, if we're going to deal with this changing world. We've got competition, we've got deregulation, and these factors that are managed perhaps by the federal government, or impact on us on a depending on the organisation we're in, but can impact, and you've seen that recently in all sorts of ways. Manufacturing in Australia has of course declined because of these factors, so that impacts then on those workers and those businesses and how they're going to either change, restructure, or move. Technology likewise. The whole idea of knowledge management has come to the fore, so that we don't just learn as individuals, but we try and have some sort of central way of accessing information. So of course organisations now have intranets, and that's a lot to do with managing our knowledge and keeping not reinventing the wheel, but knowing perhaps what other parts of the organisation are doing, how they've solved problems. There's also social factors and political factors. So in terms of even Australia and its borders having quite a big international group here now, we have to learn about other cultures more than we perhaps had to in the past, although we've always been quite a big migrant nation since white settlement. But learning about Aboriginal people, of course, is very important too. So there's lots of ways that we have to consider groups other than ourselves, however we might define that. So what's lifelong learning? It's a simple idea that everyone learns throughout their lives. Lifelong learning has been increasingly seen as a requirement of participation in what some say is the knowledge society. So we just have to accept, I think, that we have to adapt and change and learn every day. There's some different theoretical perspectives. The humanist perspective, that we want to learn over our lifetime so that we can be a real participant in a free democracy, that we understand social justice and can work to promote that with others, that we can be a free society, and that disadvantaged communities can actually partake in learning. So in terms of online learning, as I mentioned earlier, we originally set out our online learning through OUA to reach communities, maybe ones disadvantaged, especially by distance, in not having local universities, for example. So the humanist perspective is one. The cultural is one, another one which is about fulfilment in life and self-realisation, so more of a focus on yourself, and that we can learn what we want to in an open society. And then there's the economic human capital perspective, which is that we have an economic imperative in the face of rapid change, and that we really have to, if we want to survive economically, we have to be learners, we have to be adaptable, we have to be able to take on new ideas, solve new problems, and that's the way that we can gain competitive advantage against others countries. So there's also a vocational emphasis there, that we need to learn particular skills. We need to learn those skills that are needed in our society. So there are different ways of thinking about lifelong learning, and I guess I see them as quite overlapping in some ways. People in disadvantaged communities, for example, some of those people might want a specific vocational training, apprenticeship or whatever. So I think they're overlapping myself. So one important aspect of this is our own government training imperatives. So this particular website, training.gov.au, is the database on vocational education and training in Australia. So all of the different training packages, the qualifications you can get, the different courses, the units of competency, and they've all been developed for people in the training sector. This approach to learning and development is based on a competency approach, where the trainee needs to demonstrate their competence in a particular area of study in order to achieve a qualification. So if you've ever done, say, a TAFE course, you'll know that it's very much about competence. Can you do it or can't you? Of course, the university education is more about theoretical understanding, but we also cover, of course, practical skills, but we're very much looking at that blend of theory and practice. So what theoretical perspective does this example draw on? I guess you could say it draws on the vocational emphasis, the economic human capital theory, but I think it could also be seen as certainly having some of those other qualities as well that we talked about in the previous slide. Models of learning, this has been separated out by some scholars. So a traditional model of learning might be education, in an institution from childhood through to early adulthood, very teacher-focused, face-to-face theory and abstract, but also learning by rote, as some of you may remember with the times table, that it's instructional and that you're qualified in something. Whereas lifelong learning is much more open. It's everywhere. It's work. It's home. It's across your lifetime. It's driven by you. You might have a specific desire to learn a particular skill, or whether that's creative, like art, or some sort of social skill. You can access it by distance, by e-learning. You might like to practice. There's this idea of reflection, which you see coming through in this course, actually, in this unit, where you're asked to reflect on your own experiences. It's constructivist, in other words, what you make of it, and you want to do things that are applicable to you. So if you want to develop a particular skill, you seek that out and you do that. So I think you can see that we're all moving towards the lifelong learning way of thinking, and that's coming through in schools now as well. So I don't think there's such a division as there may have been. Do organisations promote lifelong learning? Are you in one? Do you know of one? Do you think learning is promoted in your organisation or the organisations that you'll be reading about, or in the cases? So it's an important question. Continuing professional development is a planned and formulated process of learning that protects and advances claims for professional status. Professionals are recognised because of their expertise or their expert status. So you will see this in particular professions. So if you're, say, a teacher, you will be expected to do certain aspects of a PD, professional development, to keep your status. Same with town planning, same with psychology. So there's a lot of opportunities for continuing professional development, and a big argument that you should be engaged in that if you're in those professions. So various professions demand CPD as a membership requirement, which you may already know of. HR isn't like that. It's not as specific a profession as some of these are. So, professions see themselves as being at risk from intrusion by non-experts. So that's why they're very protective of their professional status. There may be emerging professions as time goes on, professions that draw professional statement and have required CPD aspects. But as I mentioned, the HRD profession is not there, but I suspect it will be there one day. So if we think about knowledge is power. How do we identify sources of knowledge? How do we know what we know and what we could find out? What's the difference between formal and informal learning? So this is formal learning, but here it draws, in this unit, we draw on informal learning as well. We say the value of your experience is really important and can be included in your own professional learning and your own professional development. So you'll see that coming through in assessment item 1 in particular. We also note that CPD is about taking responsibility, continuing professional development. So even where certain things are not required, professionals by law say professionals want to keep their knowledge, skills and attitudes up to date, and they take responsibility for identifying their learning and development needs. So CPD is about identifying your own needs, working out how to meet those as a professional, even if you're not, as in HRD, you're not being instructed from above. So many of you would have gone through that process in taking this unit. A CPD model, continuing professional development model, is this cycle of assessing your needs, working out a personal development plan, doing it, reviewing what you learned, and then seeing whether there's other needs that have arisen. So I guess the point of this slide with our little goldfish is saying that we need to actually think about outside our own little bubble in terms of our own continuing professional development. We shouldn't do it in isolation, actually. Isolation from other professions or the organisation that we work in, etc. CPD transfer is an issue, and we're going to talk about transfer more a bit later on. But it's important that our learning is actually applied to our professional practice. So we can go and do a course, say in leadership development, but then we do need to take the opportunities to practice those skills, or we don't really learn from in any meaningful way from the experience. So reflection on practice is such an important thing for professionals in terms of their own abilities and their growing sense of just being able to manage this role well in a complex environment. Just looking here now at ethical, the situation. So in other professions too, medicine, for example, there's a whole code of ethics set out, and you can say, well, yes, you broke that or you didn't. In HRD, that's a lot more implicit. So we have to be really aware of our ethical situation, and when ethical dilemmas do arise, that we know they're an ethical dilemma and we work on that. So we hope that we have an ethical, positive orientation towards the treatment of human beings. We see many circumstances of that not happening, but we would hope that on the whole HRD does consider other people in an ethical way. So there's different ethical perspectives. The humanist adult learning theory, Carl Rogers and Malcolm Knowles, that the learner has the absolute right to learn, to be in control of the learning situation, to express their needs, and to just really have control. Learning style theory, which is what we talk about here, has some practical justification for training. So we want to assist the process of acquiring theoretical and practical skills, but we have to, in that formulation, really think about, well, why are we doing it? What's the justification for it? So in that sense, in HRD, we have to say, well, is it for the person and is it for the organisation? What's important at this point? And the OD movement, organisational development, there's a strong ethic of care built into that particular approach. Strategic HRM and with strategic HRD as a subset has really developed this idea of that we have to be very people focused. We have to care about the people that we're involved with, and so that we have to really do both. We have to care about people, but we also have to develop their competence, which is really one and the same thing, I guess, from some perspectives. That we want to develop organisational cultures that are positive. We want to help people to grow and develop, but then we understand that that's got something to do and a lot to do with enhancing organisational performance and effectiveness and competitiveness. It's about bringing people on board, understanding why HRD is important, and a lot of that can be tied back to that mission and values and overarching goals, i.e. strategy, that we discussed in week 2. So we argue that HRD practitioners should develop an ethic of care. Why are they doing the interventions? Does it align with not only the vision of the organisation but also with social responsibility and sustainability of organisations which are growing and nurturing for people? Do interventions help participants to feel psychologically safe? So as practitioners we need to make sure that we're not putting people on the spot, exposing people's weaknesses publicly, etc. So we're not showing people up, that what we're doing is enhancing people, their feelings about themselves and their competencies. And also HRD professionals should understand their own values and beliefs and how that impacts on their professional practice. So assessment item 1 really tries to get at some of these ideas as well. So in conclusion, we've talked about awareness of your own career, which we look at in assessment item 1, especially question 2. We've noted that training and development activities, HRD, can be vulnerable to unethical practices. For example, people paying money for a program, say, that's not evaluated properly, or where people aren't treated well, or the program hasn't really responded to the needs that have been expressed. So we need to make sure that from what we can do, that we engage in ethical practice. HRD professionals need to understand themselves, others, and the context that they're working in. And one of the complexities of the role is that HRD professionals are typically intermediaries between power interests in organisations that we talked about in week 2. So with all that complexity around vision, mission, strategy, but then the implementation of that between management and HRD professionals can sometimes be quite fraught in terms of which power interests do you go towards? Do you become the employee's voice, or do you side with management? That sort of thing. That's the reference here to power. Next week, week 4, we're going to focus on learning theories, and this is going to be suggesting that it's a good opportunity to think about your own learning and how that can be related theoretically. Okay, thank you.